welcome to another Pretalk with Eunji Jeong. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Excited to be here.
I'm happy you're here. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Eunji Jeong. As the founder and chief product designer at Design Connected, I help businesses strategically leverage artificial intelligence and successfully measure and achieve their KPIs while, of course, as a designer, prioritizing customer trust and user experience. So Design Connected is a design agency. I spend most of my time really working with leadership audiences, trying to guide them where to prioritize, what to do, and most importantly, what not to do in this incredibly fast evolving space.
You're saying what not to do. Now, here's the interesting thing. You are together with some colleagues in the field, not in your company, but in the field. You're in a panel discussion at the summit. And the topic of this panel discussion is what makes a good conversation. Now, you said specifically what not to do. Now I'm really interested.
Totally.
What shouldn't you do in order to get a good conversation?
Okay, so
From a design perspective,
let's break this down. Yes, of course.
Oh.
So there are a lot of parts that I want to break it into pieces, right? So like I said, telling people what not to do is a big part of my job. Because often when someone comes to me with a project that involves AI, oftentimes, they bring a solution or a plan to implement this technology, right? So my job is to try to bring them back to the problem that they're trying to solve. And the solution might not even touch near AI. And that's just so important to remind my clients and the business partners that, yes, it is new and shiny and like fleshy thing that's out there everyone's talking about. And frankly, like I am the one working with AI a lot. But it doesn't solve all the problem. It only solves very specific problems. So understanding, what problem we're trying to solve and seeing how AI can benefit the solution and the business and the user, of course, that's the most important thing. And you asked about, the good conversation part. And I think, so I work on the technology, however, or I work with technology. However, I try to be very, fundamental to the concept whenever I approach these problems. So, talking about what is a conversation, it's by definition, conversation is an exchange of sentiment, observations, ideas, or opinions between two or more people, right? And in human-to-human conversation, there are many nonverbal elements like pauses, facial expressions, body languages. I use a lot of my hands, tone of voice, and more. Yeah. And so being aware of what is a conversation and how this technology, conversational AI technology works is very important. That often, not many people think about when they want to use this technology. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and it sort of brings something to my mind, because if we talk about a good conversation and a conversational AI, in my regular podcast, I used to test a lot of chatbots. I toned down a bit because there were so many bad chatbots, and I was sort of done with the negativity. I'm a very positive person, so it became annoying that, this is such a shitty chatbot, and big companies, small companies didn't make a difference. So then you start wondering, why are a lot of chatbots so bad? And there's interestingly enough, in my opinion, two important reasons. One is that
Mm-hmm.
the company started off with a good idea and for a chatbot and enough people, enough budget, etc. And then the next year they're like, oh, but we need to give it more money and more people and more attention. It's like a baby. You have to keep nurturing it, and otherwise it sort of goes south. Well, the baby doesn't go south, but wrong comparison. But you understand what I mean, right?
Right.
That's the one thing that companies forget. They need to do a long-term commitment to the project and not a short-term
Mm-hmm.
commitment. Otherwise, it's a self-fulfilling
Yes.
prophecy that you have a bad chatbot, what everybody's complaining about. That's the one part. The other part of a bad chatbot is that you have very good conversation designers, and they're very
Mm-hmm.
knowledgeable, but they try to make the conversation really beautiful, which I totally
Yes.
understand from a conversation design perspective. But I found out there's like two types of conversations, if you could even call it so. The one type is an actual conversation, and that's where LLMs are
Mm-hmm.
really could be really handy, or AI. But the other part is
Right.
a person comes to a chatbot and wants to get shit done. And I think those are more
Yes.
process oriented bots. And then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes buttons, and I think I'm cursing right now in conversation design land, but buttons are actually a short track in the conversation or in the chatbot,
Mm-hmm.
to get shit done. Let's not talk. Let's not type. Let's not do anything. Just press the button, and you get. I'll bring you to where you want to go, or I'll give you what
Yes.
you need. And interestingly enough, that's controversial in a lot of design spaces. So I think that's where the difference is. You have process bots and actual conversational bots. And if you try to
Mm-hmm.
design the process conversation, usually you frustrate your customer. So I've put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion. I have
I
no idea
think
if you
that's
agree with this.
so. I mean, I agree 100%, like 200% with
Oh,
that,
thank you.
comment that you just made. And I think that's why it's so important. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to go back to the problem that you're trying to solve. Like, are you trying to supply a product that makes pleasant conversation with people? Or are you trying to, drive some metrics that are more business centric, product centric, or something else, like getting things done, right? And another thing that you like, there's so much that I would love to unpack from what you
Go,
just
go,
mentioned, Doran.
go.
But
We have
another
time.
thing that, yeah, another thing I want to say is, um, when people start a conversation, especially with a business or a chatbot, they are almost always interested in some sort of action, like you said. And people are not really concerned about the act of exchanging conversational turns with the bot, but rather interested in getting something done through the action, through the medium of conversation, right? So for example, I have a haircut appointment right after this call. So I have to, like, when
So you
we're
have
done,
to
I have to
rush.
go. Yeah. um, so yesterday I called a salon, and when the person picked up the phone and he said, "Hi, this is blah blah hair salon. How can I help you?" I said, like, "Hey, I need a haircut. Do you have availability tomorrow?" And he asks, "Do you have a designer in mind?" And I answered, like, "Yeah, I usually see Anna." And the conversation keeps going on, right? The call, in that call, as I exchange a conversational turn with this person, I'm not at all concerned about, the actual action of turn taking. All I cared about is the final result of the call, which is scheduling my hair appointment, right? So that's something that, I
So,
unfortunately
can I
see a lot
interrupt
of.
you? So you're saying
Of
the rest
course.
of the rest. So you're saying the rest of the interaction was actually irrelevant. So sorry, this because your point was, if he would have had said, if he would have been an IVR saying, "Oh, this is the hair
Mm-hmm.
salon. Which when do you want to have an appointment? Okay, tomorrow. Which
Mm-hmm.
designer you want to have an appointment with? Anna." Okay, do you have any preferred times, or the other way around? We have the following slots available. Which slot would you like? Okay, well, we have your phone number because you're calling with a phone number. Please state your name,
Hmm.
and done. And you get a confirmation text message, and that's it. Here's your appointment, right? That would
Well,
have
it's
been
not
as
that
good.
it's, yeah, exactly. Like, so the actual like turns is not that they are irrelevant. They are more of contingent, right? They're contingency to the core action that I'm trying to get. Like, I want to schedule my appointment, and there are all of these details that you have to fill in. Um, and if you think about it, it's like filling out a form, right? But instead, we are filling out the form, quote unquote, in the act of having a conversation, which makes it so much more human, engaging and easy, to be frank. And where I see most of the chatbot falls and fails, and it's just not really pleasant chatbot experience, is when the chatbot tries to focus too much on like having that smooth exchange of conversational turn rather than progressing towards the action, which is the reason for calling or reason for that interaction.
See, this is really interesting that you say it in this way, and you use the example of the hairdresser. Now, if you call a hairdresser, it makes sense that you call to make an appointment, right? Or to
Hmm.
cancel an appointment or to change the date. But it's all related to an appointment and maybe the cost if someone is new.
Right.
Now, if you connect to a company that has a ton of products or a ton of services, you don't know what the
Yes.
person comes in for. And it keeps me blowing my mind that so many companies, that when you go to the chatbot, they're first, and they have usually they have a login for customers. Their first question should be, "Are you already a customer?" And if the answer
Hmm.
is no, then it's a total different conversation than, "Yes, please log in so we can make the service personal." That's a different kind of chatbot. You make it a so much more pleasant experience. And
Yep.
you can ask, is it about one of the products you have or one of the services, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you can create a far more pleasant experience. Um, and
Hmm.
it's not being done. You just for much further down the line in the conversation, you get that question, and then you're like, yeah, well, you know what? I get the phone, and then it becomes really interesting. I get on the phone, and they want to make it personal. They ask me, oh, what's your last name, your date of birth, and your I don't know, your address, or some, or the last four numbers of your bank account, something really simple to get access to your personal data. Now, if you do it online,
Hmm.
you have to jump through a million hoops, so much more tighter security, which makes so why is it if I call, it's a much more pleasant experience than if I do it online. So I think the if you look at all the channels a company has to create a pleasant service experience, they are not
Hmm.
aligned. And I think
Right.
if you talk about design, that sort of blows my mind that companies strategically do not align the newer channel as a chatbot with the existing channels where people are happy with, and at the same time you want to drive them away from the existing channels because they are expensive, to the
Uh-huh.
so-called cheaper channels, but you don't make the experience more pleasant than the older channels. And if you get one chance, in my opinion, to create that pleasant
Hmm.
experience, and if you don't, then people will go back to the old channels. And of course, they
Right.
try and block that and hide the phone number, and we know the tricks in the book.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
and,
there's
and
so much game there.
yeah, and what is interesting, and that's what I would like your opinion on, because you're in the design sphere, and I know it's tech oriented, but how is it possible that if you look at brand values, right? And there's all these
Mm-hmm.
talks about big brands and their design and their values and blah 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 blah, and that's related to their service design. Then you come to their chatbot, and one of the examples was, I don't know, I didn't recently try their chatbot, but Virgin Atlantic was a perfect example. Great brand,
Mm-hmm.
amazing, right? Go
Mm-hmm.
on their planes, it's wonderful, it's a delight. Now you go to their chatbot, it's the biggest demise at the time. I don't know now. It's like, how can this, in their brand not be aligned with the values of their brand? It should be adventurous and fun and engaging. It was none of the above.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work. And in my opinion, if you can't get it to do what the brand stands for, even in an experimental phase, and just let it do one thing really good, don't put it out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's your view on this? How do you align with the brand values? How do you align the chatbot, especially AI driven? How do you align that? Because that's so hard to keep it on
Okay.
track.
Well,
Difficult question. I realize
that's
that.
no, like, I mean, it's not difficult. It's just a big question. And I think I want to touch upon a few different points.
Go
First
on.
is the business value, or what is the business? Do we understand what the business is about? And then second is the customer trust piece that you just mentioned, and of course the data, right? And I'll tackle the data first. So you mentioned that it seems like good brands and big brands that people love is strategically not sharing data, or not sharing the brand image with the chatbot. I disagree with that. Or like, based on my experience working with big brands, it's often that they do want access to the existing data about the customers. However, the data is not designed and structured in a way that is shareable with all these new platforms and channels like chatbot, IVR, voice bots, whatever that is. The amount of API calls that a single chatbot can bring, or IVR can bring to the company, is just is over, like, it's just too much for the API to handle. And they're just afraid of, well, first of all, their data structure is not built to handle that much of the API calls. And second, they're afraid of, you know, uh, mistakenly releasing sensitive information. Like, they're afraid of all these, like, things that shouldn't be done, when they give access to chatbots, to this internal data system. So they're strategically blocking them, or blocking them out, maybe, but more so, it's not set up correctly for chatbots to share or have access to this data. So
Not even,
it's
not,
funny
hold on.
that,
Angie,
yeah, yeah.
hold on. Not even behind the login.
So yes. So even with, so for example, I worked on this chatbot with this big company in the past that had like a very specific functioning bot for handling customer complaints. And this bot brought um, a few million interactions a day, that like, not there, and their call center agents who were handling up to like few thousands, like 5,000, 7,000 interactions a day, right? It was a very small team, like, and their the call center data systems were built to handle that much interactions that the call center agents could handle in a day, not the chatbot volume that was brought on way later, after the call center application was built. So in those cases, yeah.
Angie, another
Go
question.
ahead.
So I'm trying to understand this. Are you saying that the backend system that from in this case, the call center backend system,
Mhm.
basically a legacy system, prohibited them to do a chatbot at scale.
Correct. And it's not only
Okay.
the call center system, because, you know, like it's like it's so frustrating as a designer, who wants to solve and deliver customer value and business value, through my projects, when I'm hindered by this, massive, crazy, dirty, data structure in the backend. Like, there are separate data, APIs, or, data structure for, customer information sector. And that's separate from like their, purchase history. That's separate from their like, I don't know, call center history. So when you're trying to build a smart bot that recognize the customer and handle their inquiries using their, history, chat history, search history, purchase history, whatever that is that we know we have, it's impossible to make all the connections because of how convoluted the data structure is. Um, so oftentimes I'm a designer, and the businesses don't expect me to call all the, data partners and engineering partners and architects, in the call to tell them like, hey, we cannot do this because of, like your spaces, needs fundamental groundwork to enable the next level, or, to frankly supply what the customers expect of us, right? Because we're living in the 2000, you know
25.
25, like, yeah. Like, we're not in the 1990s. Like, come on, let's make this right.
But here's the thing. All the data structures, or the data
Hmm.
infrastructure is usually not designed by people like you or people like me.
Right.
It's designed by technical people who design backend systems and data structures and data warehouses and what have you. Um, so the learning from this is, in my opinion, and I've seen it in a lot of other
Hmm.
companies where they have, oh, we need to do something. Oh, let's get another system. But and some systems like now it's better. But Salesforce is a perfect example. They had like a proprietary
Hmm.
data model. You couldn't get access to it. It's like a nightmare. And once you're in, you're sort of
Hmm.
hooked. You can't go anywhere. I know
Yep.
now it's better. Um, but if you think about that, the strategic vision of a company, what are we going to do with our data, or how are we going to use our data, our customer data, in a responsible way in the future, and then
Hmm.
reason back, okay, what do we need to do now in order in the future to be able to use it, or not to block anything we cannot imagine right now. I think that's the part that was missing for a very long time. And now a lot of companies are starting to figure out, okay, our data structure is such rubbish. We need to do that. And that is very costly. You know that as
Yes.
well. In order to do that,
And
maintain
dangerous
that,
too.
dangerous, and then single point of truth problems start arising, then all of a sudden you have two different values for the same customer. Which one is true, like an address?
Yeah.
How the
Yep.
hell do we know? We need to keep logs and then compare that. And where do we compare? Who decides? Then you have the right to be forgotten. So somewhere a customer pushes a button and wants to be forgotten, but we didn't. Well, you know what happens, right? So
Right.
the basic design of the systems is not catering to this. So I think the big
Hmm.
learning here is, as a company, if you're reinvesting in IT systems or changing your IT systems, start with your data and build on
Well,
that,
yes,
because
and
that's where the real
also,
value. So that's where the
yeah,
real
I
future
mean,
value is.
100%. Well, that's like the cornerstone to, building useful, functioning and customer centric experience, right? Um, and I would add to that bring people outside of just engineering department, to hear hear what needs to be considered, right? Like people just don't think of like, oh, we need to talk to designers to talk about data structure or like how we architect the back end, which I totally get. Yes, maybe up until this point, it wasn't as the size of the effort that we tried to create omni-channel experience wasn't as big. But with the idea of chatbot and now assistant bots, right, are emerging. Like there is more significant, uh, I guess, problems and also importance to how we consider or structure the data that enables all these new experiences that we're trying to offer our internal and external users. It's just so crucial to bring in the designer perspective and product perspective and all these other professionals in the conversation to make this happen.
You just ruined the ideas of CEO that introducing AI, conversational AI, is cheap. Just
Totally,
turned out to be
totally.
really expensive, right? No, that
Yeah, yeah.
that's the one of the other things I wanted to ask you. Um, how do you run it? No, do you run into the notion or the ideas in companies that they think, oh, we introduce AI and everything becomes cheaper, and then you got to kill the dream and say, well, maybe not. Besides the data issue, because that's a really expensive one. But if you think about that, how do you manage that? How do you take away? How do you explain? It's like, guys, you need a long-term commitment, and I'm going to kill your dream. It's not going to be cheap. Well, it's true,
Well,
right?
yeah, it is. Well, I think, again, going back to the problem that they're trying to solve, it helps reframing the conversation with the leadership. For me, as a designer, I really need to understand not only the user, but the business and their needs, right? And when I ask questions like, does the business understand what customers expect of them? Or, what is the brand image that the customers have? Or what type of help, service, or support do customers expect to get from the business? Oftentimes that there's some like not small but significant gap between what the brand thinks they are to the customers versus what customers thinks of them, right? And it often translates to building a bot persona, to align internally and externally what and how the brand supports its customers. And in order to do that, I need the engagement with the leadership, like executive leadership, like the marketing team, the customer support team, like the product development team, and pretty much the entire company to discuss and align who are we to the customer, and how can this, if we were to build a bot that supports our customers, that customers will use, what is this persona that we're building, right? Because that's going to be the face, or that's going to be another employee that you're onboarding, training, and putting out there to confront and deal with customers. It's not just the chatbot. These days, I think not a lot of people, or more businesses start to think about this concept of, okay, like if we were to build this artificial intelligent employee, like what is
Digital
this
coworker.
going to be like? Exactly.
It's a
Like
digital
we're pretty
coworker.
much like, exactly, yeah. And that's not a short-term project. You need to build this person, quote unquote, bot, and you need to train it. You need to, shape every
Absolutely.
little aspect of it. Yeah.
One last question, Angie. If you bring all these blood types in a company together, right? And how
Yes.
often do they disagree? And how big are the disagreements in general about what the persona should be and should do? Because I'll tell you later about my experience, but I'm curious what you run into. Are they all in agreement, or do you usually have a different image of that persona?
You know, I think the stronger or more solid the brand is. So if they, for example, I always ask, what is your core value of the company? And more solid the core value of the company is, or their mission is, easier that conversation becomes, right? Of course, the size matters, and history matters and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I think it boils down to the trust. Um, you know, there are two parts to this. Do customers trust bots, and do employees and the company trust the bot, right? And it's a huge issue that I try to bring up from the very early stage of the design process. So whenever I talk to businesses, because trust is a critical piece to successful adoption and engagement with users. Like, I don't know about you, but whenever I call a brand and I'm like talking, like obviously IVR or some sort of a chatbot greets me, I'm one of those people that like, I don't want to talk to you, like customer agent. I just like bypass the interaction of it all because of my previous history of dealing with it. And it's like, I'm someone who built chatbot and I understand you know its nature, and I still does that, I still do that.
You know why?
And
You know why
why
you
why
do
is
that?
that?
Because
Yeah.
I have the same, because you get frustrated. You know that they can do a better job, and you need to skip all these steps in between, which you really don't need. And if you ask,
Mm-hmm.
say, live agent, that it takes you to a person who immediately does what gets the shit done, and otherwise, so
Exactly.
in your case, a live agent is faster because you know how to get there. For everybody else, they need
Mm-hmm.
to go through the steps to hopefully get there, and maybe not. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
professional deformation, or how you say that. You know how it
Yeah.
works, so you go around it. And it's also a frustration with a bad bot. You don't even wait for it. You have no patience, because it's
Yep.
what's coming. In the beginning of
Yep.
the design, you understand what's happening. It's like, okay, this is not for me. Period. So
Uh-huh.
that's what happens. I do the same, and I think most of our colleagues in the field do the same. And that's how we
Yep.
recognize bad bots. Is okay, this is not going to work for me, at least,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's so true. And you talked about, you asked me, is it difficult to create an alignment when I talk about bot persona? And the employee trust is a huge piece in that conversation, I think, because oftentimes the employee or the executive leadership don't trust what chatbots can do, or they just don't believe in the technology, or they think it's like, oh, of course it's good in the idea, but like I've never dealt with a good chatbot experience in my life. So like, yes, idea sounds good, but like, is it really feasible? So breaking it down and navigating that trust conversation is really important.
And thank you for that answer. And I think you're spot on. And there's one other thing for the C-level. It's when they hear the cost, the long-term cost, and in their head, it's like, okay, we have a chatbot. That means replacing employees. So our cost is going to go down. If we have a one-time investment,
Mm,
okay, someone manages it. We'll do it in the communications department or marketing or IT or whatever. They understand you need all of them. That's what they don't understand. And then all of a sudden, they see the business is like, how's it that our cost is going up and we're not firing anyone? It's like, yeah, but these people are knowledgeable. You don't want to fire them. They're hard to get, and they can actually handle the difficult cases. It allows you to grow and scale with a
mhm.
stable cost base. And this is a hard concept to grasp. That's why it's so hard to get long term commitment on budgets and staffing, in my opinion. And I
Mhm.
think that's where some sort of education part for C-level executives should be. It's like, okay, you can do this, but you need to be in it for the long term, like you said before, and build that bot, that persona. It takes time, it takes trial and error, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and that's valuable. So you know not what not to do, and involve customers, and that's scary too, because what if they don't like it? They're not going to like some
Yeah.
of it. And
Yeah.
so I think that
Um,
there's a yeah, go on.
well, real quick, I just want to add that the idea of chatbots replacing human workforce, that's something that, a lot of, I think a lot of professionals in this field are already talking about that, like maybe, that's not the case. How about, but chatbots will actually provide space or create space for human workforce to do other things like selling or upselling, right? And doing other, like marketing work or some other capacity of, what they could be doing. And also, chatbots are not a solution for every businesses, in my opinion. Frankly, not all businesses need chatbots. There are also a lot of, software as service chatbots that are, pre-built for businesses to adopt, and that could be, the most efficient answer to some of the businesses that I talk to. So, my job is to just, again, understanding their goals and what their priorities, and it's trying to help them achieve it while, helping them not doing what they shouldn't be doing, right? Um, and that could be very well be, building a chatbot.
Angie, thank you very much. I think that closing statement was wonderful. And I hope to see you in Edinburgh. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Of course, and thank you for the conversation.
See you in Edinburgh.